Namaskar. Today in this video, I am going to talk about a brief history of American literature and the important philosophical concept that is known to us as Transcendentalism. Students, so far you have been well initiated into the history of British literature and quite possible Indian literature too. But in your course of English honors and be a fifth semester, American literature is a new paper. So it becomes but necessary for all of you to have a proper understanding about America and American literature. Do briefly in that way. Uh, uh, to begin with, I shall be talking about two perspectives and two approaches. The first approach is of D.H. Lawrence, who, in his book Studies in Classical American Literature, published in the year 1923, appreciates the kind of literature America or Americans have created. And in this connection, he writes, there is a uniqueness that belongs to the American continent and to nowhere else. It is the shifting over the old psyche to something new, a displacement. So he is focusing on a newness and uniqueness. On the other hand, we have F.R. Lewis, who, in his book, The Great Tradition, published in the year 1948, includes one of the most important American novelist, American writer, Henry James, the writer of famous The Portrait of a Lady, as a British novelist. So we have these two approaches. And in order to understand the first approach and the second approach, we shall have to make an entry into the annals of American literature so that we can have a kind of proper beginning with the kind of American literature was and is. For all the practical purposes, you all know that America was discovered by Columbus in the last of 15th century, and if I remember the date, that is 1492. And after its discovery, though it's quite disturbing and uncomfortable to talk about discovery of America and discovery of India. So discovery of America was not for the local inhabitants of America, red Indians. It must be certainly a kind of discovery to those who belong who belong to Europe or the other parts of the world. In this connection, it is important to talk about one incident which happened in the year 1992 when European Americans in that way began to celebrate their 500 years of American discovery. The Red Indians, the original inhabitants of America, they registered a voice of dissent, saying that America was not discovered at all. America was there before its discovery, so-called discovery. Anyway, so The point is, America was discovered, as we have to take this from Europeans' point of view, from Europeans' perspective, and so likewise, Europeans began to settle into America, because America happened to be a new land, a new world, a new found land. I mean, the land of hopes and desires, and it proved to be a heaven for so many people, especially on the grounds of religion and politics, political and religious backgrounds in that way. So, when we look at the early settlers in America, we find many criminals and persecuted people, and those who were transported, and burglars and thieves, murderers. And on the other hand, as we all know that America was also populated by those people who were dissatisfied with the kind of state of church and state of religion was back in Europe. So we all know how, in the wake of Renaissance, there were several movements that focused on the reformation of the churches. But one thing was sure, and that was how church was degraded, and how church fell into kind of abyss of moral and ethical corruption in that way. So many ardent Christians, they all left Europe and began to settle themselves in America in 16th century, especially in North America, and they started a new form of Christianity that is known to us as Puritanism. So, as far as written or literature is concerned, we do have the availability of written literature, but only from 16th century. It means that literature in its written form began in 16th century, maybe after that, maybe 16th and 17th century. But it doesn't mean that before or prior to 16th and 17th century there was no American literature. Nobody can deny the importance and significance and the presence of oral literature, folk literature. So that was the part of America, and that must have been. I mean, there is no question of must have. It was there. It was there, but there was no any written record. There was no documentation of that kind of literature. So. Uh, 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 Now it becomes necessary for all of us to know that how America became a colony, and America, a new country, a new land. It turned out to be a colony, and you must be knowing that in that 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, the world power center was Great Britain. So Britain was just colonizing every known place I mean, those places which were rich in its resources. So America too became the victim of exploitation, and it became a colony of Great Britain. But many European settlers from different European countries. They assembled themselves together and they waged a war for liberty, war for freedom, war for happiness against British regime, and they declared American independence in the year 1776. You must be knowing 4th of July to be the American Independence Day. So it is necessary for us to know all these things, and if you look at this time period, it can easily be designated, it can easily be categorized as a colonial period, and we can have several kinds of writings in this period as well. But most of the writings of this period, they were taken to be a kind of a prototype, a kind of copy, a kind of imitation copy of what? British counterpart, British literature. So they were not given that much of credit, they were not given that much of importance or significance in that way. So, but the question is, they were being written in plenty, and the establishment of famous American universities, especially the first one, that is Harvard in that way. So even the intellectuals and teachers of the Harvard University, they were not in that position to accept the uniqueness of American literature. They themselves were considering that so-called American literature to be kind of trash or kind of rubbish or kind of, they told, a kind of writing written in the style of British writers. So we have this Cornell University as well. So in spite of these bad responses, Americans kept writing and they kept contributing in the famous journal, magazine, the Edinburgh Review. Uh, the primary form of these settlers' writings, that turned out to be simply focusing on either in the form of certain sermons or exploration narrative. Now the point is, as I told you in the beginning, that how America saw a new form of Christianity that is known to us as Puritanism. So sermon in that way, preachings and teachings, and Puritanism is supposed to be the strictest form of Christianity. So exploration narrative in that way, we can talk about how writers must have come to America and they must have explored America. They must have traveled far and wide. They must have seen different climates of America, different regions of America, different landscapes of America. And so how these became the part and parcel of their writings, travel narratives, travel writings in that way. So we can see America's description in terms of God's chosen land, discovered and explored by chosen people in search of New Jerusalem in the desolation and wilderness. So the kind of religious attachment, religious interpretation we see easily. But amidst this desolation and wilderness, they had to create a new city upon the hill, and it's a difficult task to, it's not simply a simple task at all to leave one place and settle at one place at one go. It must have been a mammoth task. It must have been a big task. The task would be similar as to establish a new city upon the hill. Difficult. I mean, difficult situation in that way. So the discovery of America was taken as an utopian world, as popularized in the literature of utopia. You must be knowing of Thomas More's Utopia, an ideal world, fit to live in, fit to survive, and to create something new. We have from this colonial period, we have some important writers and their writings. To name some of them, I will begin with William Bradford, who has the credit to write famous of Plymouth Plantation. And who can forget Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and who came up with their most famous, the Declaration of Independence. And in the in this book, they write. I think this piece of writing is important to talk about the kind of American society they were envisioning, and the kind of literature that came out of that. So I quote, we hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you must be remembering the famous French Revolution and the famous slogan, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So we have this slogan here: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whatever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. So, democracy, the ideals of democracy, you must be remembering famous George Washington, who defines democracy as of people, by people, and for people. So this these democratic ideals happen to be the one of the they happen to be the core of typical American system as envisioned by Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and we can see other writers in the way who will endorse to this ideal. So we have Charles Brockden Brown for his Violent. We have Washington Irving, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. We have James Fenimore Cooper, very famous for The Last of the Mohicans. I think a movie has been made on that as well. And we have Harriet Beecher Stowe, very famous for Uncle Tom's Cabin and different other forms of writings. Uh, uh, Now it must be noted that I was talking about Puritanism, but somewhere Puritanism turned out to be very strict, very severe, and people began to take themselves away. So we have certain new philosophical sects which emerged as a kind of response, a kind of counter to the ideals and beliefs of uh, 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 Puritanism. So, in that line of thought, we have this Unitarianism, and this it was established, or it came into existence in the late 18th and early 19th century due to the weakening state of Puritanism. And this Unitarianism was absorbed in the spirit of Enlightenment. So the Unitarianists believed that reason and common sense to be the primary things, and on this basis they rejected the Puritan notion of innate depravity. What is innate depravity? I shall just focus on that because in the next section I have to talk about transcendentalism. So before that, I shall be more than happy to talk about Puritanism side by side along with transcendentalism. So they also rejected the idea of a predestined salvation, and instead of Holy Trinity, God as one being in three persons, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, they believed in one God, that is Jesus Christ. So now we have to move towards transcendentalism, and this can be taken as a different kind of literary phase, and it is also known to us as Romanticism. So I shall be talking about transcendentalism and Puritanism side by side. So let us begin with that. So the first thing first, that transcendentalism or Romanticism began against Puritanism and the philosophical ideas that were the part and parcel of this very Puritanism. So they were against, who were against? Transcendentalists. They were against the concept of original sin. It means Puritans believed in the concept of original sin. So original sin refers to the creation of Adam and Eve, and how they had been asked to live in the Garden of Eden in the heaven, and they were asked not to pluck the forbidden fruit, that is apple. And we know the story that how Satan, in the form of a snake, approached Eve, and Eve in turn pursued Adam, and in turn Adam plucked the forbidden fruit, apple. And as a result, they were banished, they were exiled from the Garden of Eden to live on earth. So according to Puritans, this is the original sin, whereby the two primary human beings, Adam and Eve, they went against the desire of the God. They went against the instructions. So by going away with that, they committed a crime, they committed a sin. And as they are our first parents ever, so as a result, they are the sinner, so we too are the sinners. Original sin. No innate depravity. So a child is born and he is a sinner. He is a criminal. He is corrupt in that way. And this is not done. Transcendentalists believe that no, it's not possible. It's not that way. A child is not innately depraved. He is not, she is not morally corrupt. And this innate depravity or the moral corruption since the birth is attached to the concept of original sin as believed by Puritans. Salvation of selected few, refused, denied. Puritans believe that we all have come from heaven, and it must be our sincere responsibility to regain that place once again. We are here in the world of illusion and Maya, and we should design our ways, we should design our life in such a way so that we can be in a position to regain the seat, regain the place, regain our place in the Garden of Eden, in the heaven. But the point is, not all the Christians can be entitled to have a re-entry into the lost place. Only selected one, chosen one. Instead of this philosophy, Transcendentalism talks about no. Everyone, every individual human being is capable to achieve that godhood. Because the God of Transcendentalism doesn't live in the periphery or the premises of the church. He is there everywhere. He is there in every living organism. He is there in every subject and object. He is in you. He is in me. He is in each and every particle of this universe. In that way, they believe in all these things, and they also deny that whatever has to happen in one's life, it's already pre-decided, pre-written, and nothing can be done. Nobody can change this. Instead of this philosophy, transcendentalism or transcendentalists, they talk about no, this is not a thing at all. Human beings have their own common sense, have their own practical wisdom, have their own rationality, have their own intuitive power, and on this basis, a human being can change his course of life, can change his way of living. It has nothing to do with something that is prefixed, preordained, predecided, predetermined. It's not like that. God is immanent in nature, and the transcendentalists also believe that God doesn't live, as I said, doesn't live in the church. He lives in each human being. So in that way, transcendentalists talk about a kind of disapproval of institutionalized form of religion. So to make church, to make temple, to make mosque, and at this juncture, I remember a very famous Indian poet, Kabir Das. I hope you know all him very well. So I remember two couplets of Kabir. I'll be more than happy to share that here. So in one he criticizes Hindus, and he says, "पाथर पूजे हरि मिले तुम्हें पूजू पहाड़, उससे भली तो चाक पीस खाए संसार." His agenda is clear. He is against the process of converting God into a stone, into a piece of stone. If I can be graced, blessed to while worshipping a stone, it is better to worship a hill or a mountain. And better than this hill and mountain, on this piece of stone, a chalk, the stone grinding machine. This grinding machine made of stone is much more better, because it grinds, rice, wheat, barley, so that we can make ourselves happy by consuming them. And the other couplet is against that Islam or Muslim worshippers, and he says, "Kakar pathar jor ke masjid lai chinaye, tachadi mulla baag diyo kya bahra hua khudaye." So these two couples talk about how religion has been converted into an institution. Transcendentalism is against this process. Religion is not to be uh, is not to be the part of a church or the mosque or the temple. It has to be the part of open space, open area. God is there everywhere. And one need not to go to any clergyman or any beadle or any priest or any pandit or any mullah to facilitate a kind of meeting between the devotee and the God. The devotee in himself, in herself, is capable with the help of the imagination, with the help of the intuitive power, with the help of the power of the mind. One can easily transcend these mundane realities and can have the privilege, can have the bliss to have a rapport with the God, with the oversoul, with the immanent will, with that supreme critic, with that nature. So they are against this institutionalized form of religion, and this institutionalized form of religion, in turn breeds power. It breeds authority. So they give more importance to subjective realization. They give more importance to subjective power than to the power that is there in any kind of institution, any kind of authority. So they talk about inner sanctity, inner power, inner strength of a common human being, and they defy even the authorities which exercise certain amount of power. The transcendentalists talk about how culture and society, that is the material aspects of material aspects of life, have simply polluted and corrupted the noble human ways. So we have the major philosophers and writers. So we have the philosophers, especially the German philosophers like Kant, Fichte, and Schelling. And we have the romantic writers of Britain. We have Wordsworth, Coleridge, and others. And as far as the writers of transcendentalism and philosophers of this philosophy is concerned, we have the biggest, greatest Ralph Waldo Emerson. We have Henry David Thoreau, George Ripley, Margaret Fuller, Bronson Alcott, Theodore Parker, who has been an Unitarian first, and then we have James Freeman, and we have so many others who have immensely contributed in the famous magazine The Dial to further to accelerate the cause of transcendentalism. These philosophers and writers have also paved the way for the emergence of prominent American writers and authors like Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson. We have Nathaniel Hawthorne, we have Herman Melville, we have Mark Twain, and so many others, so many others. Uh, so after this, if you look at all these things, so out of this brief survey and brief account, we can talk about at least two distinct phases of American writing. The first, that is colonial writing, and the second, that is romantic or transcendentalist writing. And after this, if you look at the history of American literature, we can talk about the literature based on realism and naturalism that we primarily see in the writings of Whitman and Henry James and some others. And in 20th century onwards, we have the modern age of American literature, where we have so many writers and in terms of dramatists, in terms of poets, in terms of novelists, which we shall be discussing. To name in between a few, if you talk about some writers of that. So in poetry, we can talk about Emil Lobel, we can talk about William Carlos Williams, we can talk about Wallace Stevens, we can talk about Ezra Pound, who, yes, he was American, but he again moved to England, kept going and coming in that way. So in theater, we have Tennessee Williams, we have this writer Edward Albee, we have Arthur Miller, we have Eugene O'Neill. In fiction, we have, to begin with, William Faulkner, and then we have Ernest Hemingway, we have and so many others. So we shall be talking about these writers individually when it comes, when they come to our larger spectrum of consideration. So, thank you so much.